We're moving to help with the baby, my husband's relatives told me with categorical solemnity shortly after I returned home from the hospital, still reeling from the pain, insomnia, and terrible fatigue that had enveloped my entire body like a heavy wet blanket, preventing me from even breathing freely. I protested, weakly, because I had no strength left for rage, but deep down inside a hurricane was raging. We're a family, they insisted, as if these two words contained all the logic in the world that could justify the intrusion into our personal space, as if kinship itself were a universal pass into the holy of holies of a young mother. Okay, I forced myself to smile, a barely perceptible movement of my lips that made my cheeks ache. The next morning began with their screams, sharp, loud, as if splitting the air and awakening fear, like a school bell in a nightmare. What the hell is this? Deborah, my mother-in-law, screamed, standing in the middle of the kitchen, like on a stage, in her coat and with her hand raised, as if she was about to accuse someone of a crime. I was exhausted, so empty that I felt hollow inside, like a dried-out shell. And before we continue, and I will tell you everything in detail, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. 20 hours of labor, 20 excruciating, endless hours of pain, tears, sweat, strain, when it seemed that I was being torn apart from the inside, that my body would never be the same, that I would no longer be able to stand, think, or love. And now I'm home, with my newborn son, whom we named Mateo, a name I chose when I was 6 months pregnant, imagining myself holding him, small and warm, smelling of milk and life. I should be resting, dozing in the soft silence, hearing only the even breathing of my baby and the occasional bird calls outside the window, absorbing the peace that is so rare in motherhood. But no, instead the doorbell rang. I was lying on the sofa, half asleep, pressed against the pillow, barely moving, as if tied to this place by invisible threads of pain. Alberto, my husband, was standing in the kitchen, casually making tea, and he didn't even turn around when the bell rang. "Can you understand that, baby?" he shouted across the house. I groaned, got up with difficulty, and each step echoed in the lower abdomen with a pulsating heat. My body was a mess from childbirth, still bleeding, inflamed, unable to even move without pain. And yet I had to stand up, like a hostess at a party, go to the door, smile. I unlocked the door, clicked the latch, swung it open, and saw them. On the threshold stood Deborah, beaming, jubilantly cheerful, behind her, Orlando, the father-in-law, whistling some old tune, and at the end of the landing, Bella, Alberto's younger sister, with 2 huge suitcases, as if she were going there not for a week, but forever. "Oh, darling, here we are." Deborah squealed and already stepped into the house, without waiting for an invitation, without looking me in the eye. I blinked. "Here, for what?" Deborah put down her bag, smiled like a teacher explaining the obvious. "To help, of course. You just had a baby, we figured you'd need the whole team." Orlando walked past like he belonged, dropping his suitcase in the middle of the living room. "Long drive," he muttered, stretching. "What's for dinner?" Bella yawned, coyly, like she was coming back from a fashion show, and dragged her suitcase past me. "What room am I in?" I stood in the doorway, gripping the doorknobs so tightly that my nails dug into my palm, trying to take it all in. "What is this? What's going on here?" Alberto finally walked in, a cup of tea in his hand, sipping as if it were a lazy afternoon and not a family invasion, and he threw me an awkward smile. "They just want to help, baby." "Of course. Help." I smiled, strained and forced, like an actress in a bad play. "Your family, of course. Make yourself comfortable." Deborah beamed. "See? I knew you would understand." I turned and walked into the nursery, closing the door behind me, picked up Mateo, held him to my chest, feeling his breath, his warmth, and whispered, "It's okay, baby. Mommy can do it." I didn't sleep that night. Every time Mateo cried, Deborah burst into the nursery as if on cue, as if she'd been waiting for an excuse. The first time, shortly after midnight, I just drifted off to sleep when my son's cries cut through the silence. I rose, wincing in pain, reaching for him, but she was there before me, snatching him up as if I didn't exist. You're too quick to catch him, she scolded. You'll spoil him. I gritted my teeth. He's a newborn, I whispered. She didn't answer, just rocked him theatrically, whispering some meaningless nonsense, as if babies should be able to calm themselves. The second time, around 2 in the morning, I had just finished changing Mateo's diaper. I did it almost by touch, half asleep, under the soft light of a nightlight that cast long shadows on the walls, as if the room itself were dozing along with me, when the door creaked and Deborah came in again, as if she had been standing behind it, counting the seconds until her next visit, waiting for the moment when she could once again impose her help. Oh, darling, she sighed, watching me swaddle the baby, and there was such a condescending pity in her voice that I instantly tensed up, as if I had been shouted at. You're doing it all wrong, she added, and before I could react, deftly, with that self-assurance that comes from experience and a chronic lack of tact, she had unwrapped the swaddling cloth and swaddled him in her own way, as if I were not a mother but a random passerby who had been entrusted with a tiny life by mistake. I stood there, my trembling fingers pressed to my chest, silent, too tired to resist, but inside I was seething, inside me, who had carried him under my heart for so many months, nurtured pain, fear, hope, and now was forced to watch as strange hands invaded our tiny ritual. The third time, at 4 in the morning, as I sat exhausted in the chair, breastfeeding Mateo, feeling him cling to my body, his breath merging with mine, a brief moment of serenity, she came in again, shook her head, and without saying a word, reached out to adjust the position of his head, as if even this, the most intimate, the most sacred, was beyond me. Deborah, I said, and my voice was so quiet that the air in the room seemed to freeze. Go to bed. She patted me on the shoulder, as always, with that falsely kind expression on her face, and whispered, I'm just trying to help. Help. The word sounded like a death sentence. By morning I was swaying from fatigue, like a thin vine in a strong wind. I walked out into the living room, and a slow, absurd picture unfolded before my eyes. Orlando, sprawled on my couch in his underwear, staring unblinkingly at the TV screen as if every word of the morning news affected him personally. Deborah, in her robe and slippers, fiddling with the coffee machine, muttering under her breath. Bella, not even bothering to greet me, sitting at the dining room table, scrolling through her phone, headphones in her ears. Not one of them had noticed me, asked how I was feeling after a sleepless night, thanked me for letting them stay, expressed not a shred of sympathy or concern. And then, in that moment, when you stand in the middle of your own home and feel like a guest, it hit me with a sharp, icy clarity. They had not come to help, they had decided to move. Without an invitation, without discussion, as if it were a matter of course. I grabbed my phone, went outside, stood on the cool steps, breathed in the morning air, clear and crisp, and dialed the only person who could understand me, my friend and lawyer, Nora. She answered right away, without even waiting for the second ring. You sound like a zombie, she said, her voice confident as always. My relatives arrived with suitcases, I whispered, as if it were a terrible secret. They said they were staying to help. You should have kept quiet, she snapped. Oh, hell no. Yes, I sobbed. Is the house registered in your name? Yes, and I do the rent. Great, her voice immediately became businesslike. Check your email in an hour. When I returned to the house, there was a slight, tired, but real smile on my lips. The day had been hell. Deborah criticized my every move, from the temperature of the water in the bottle to the way I held my son. Bella turned the guest room into her own private lounge, blasting music as if there was no baby in the house. Orlando, without a word, climbed into my bed, sprawled under my covers, and snored for 3 hours, as if it were his right. Alberto did nothing. Nothing at all. At dinner, when I had cooked the food anyway, because, of course, who else would, Deborah, cutting into the steak, said in a special tone, as if it were an official announcement, we've decided to stay until Mateo is at least 3 months old. Maybe longer. I nodded, slowly, smiling, almost tenderly. Of course, Deborah, I said. Your family, she beamed. The next morning, a scream echoed through the house. It was exactly 7 o'clock. I had just put Mateo to bed after another sleepless night, and when a piercing scream came from the living room, I didn't even flinch. I yawned, got up, and walked out. Deborah was standing in the middle of the room, clutching a white sheet of paper in her hand as if it were burning. She turned on me sharply. "What the hell is that?" she hissed. "A legal notice," I replied calmly. "You have 48 hours to leave." Orlando blinked at the notice, and his face turned purple in a matter of seconds, as if the paper he held in his hand was not an innocuous legal document but a personal betrayal, a point-blank shot. You're evicting us," he said slowly, confused, as if he himself did not believe what he had said. Bella, mechanically scrolling through her phone feed, rubbed her eyes, frowned and muttered, "Is this even real?" as if she hadn't just declared the day before that she wanted her own room and place to meditate in my house. Deborah was waving the notification like a war flag, as if she could erase the letters written in black ink on a white sheet of paper with the force of her gesture. "You can't do this," she shrieked, and in that scream, the same old thing resounded again, worn to the point of transparency: "We are family." There it was, that word. The magic, as they believed, universal justification for any behavior, any tactlessness, any violation of personal boundaries. I crossed my arms over my chest and looked straight into her eyes. "Deborah," I said calmly but firmly, measuring out each word like medicine, "you didn't ask to move. You invaded my home. You treated me like a stupid child when I was a grown woman who had just given birth. You have no respect for my home, my space, or me. I want you to leave." Her face twisted, her mouth twisted into an angry grimace, and she turned sharply to Alberto. "Say something," she screamed. Alberto, standing in the corner, in sweatpants, his face unshaven, his eyes empty, ran his hands over his face as if he wanted to wipe everything off. I waited. This was his moment. His chance. He took a deep breath, and there was a hesitant, but still determined tone in his voice. "Mom, maybe you and Dad and Bella should go." Deborah's mouth fell open as if she had slapped him. "Sorry," she croaked, and he stirred again, rubbing his neck nervously. "This is her house, and we just had a baby. She needs space." Deborah's face turned purple, as if he had given away a state secret. "She needs us. She needs rest." She tried to seize the initiative, but Alberto only shook his head. "And you always barge into the nursery, Mom," he muttered, and there was more pain in his voice than reproach. "I raised you," she hissed like a snake, "and this is how you treat me?" I saw his eyes fill with the tormenting sense of guilt that she had, over the years, sown in him with pinpoint precision, building a granite fortress of manipulation where she was always the victim. He hesitated, retreated, and at that moment I spoke for him. "You have 48 hours, and my voice was cold as ice water. Or I'll call the sheriff." This time she didn't answer. She snapped her mouth shut and turned away. The house was in turmoil, whispers, swearing, shouts from the guest room, slamming doors, Bella sulking demonstratively on the couch, and I walked slowly into the bedroom, closed the door behind me and turned the lock, feeling the silence inside for the first time in days. 2 hours later, Alberto knocked, entered with a guilty look and, hanging his head, muttered, "Mom, she's very upset." I didn't answer. He sat on the edge of the bed. "She says she feels like you don't appreciate her. Like you rejected her help." I laughed, not loudly, but bitterly. "Your mother showed up with luggage, took over my house, ignored all my boundaries and treated me like I was incompetent. Now she feels rejected?" He rubbed his temples, desperate and helpless. "I just don't want things to get ugly." I looked at him and said, "It already is, Alberto. Ever since you let your family invalidate everything I do during the most fragile, painful time of my life." He tried to crack a smile. "Maybe we can compromise." "Compromise on what?" I snapped, and he recoiled. "My home? My right to recover in peace? My ability to raise my own child without your mother breathing down my neck?" "She just wants to help," he began, and I threw up my hand. "Stop it. If you say that word again." We stared at each other, and a silence fell between us, thick as a storm cloud. Then the screaming began. I don't remember who started it. I don't remember the words, just the anger, seething, furious, the kind that had been building for weeks. Finally, no longer looking me in the eye, he grabbed a pillow, muttered, "I need air," and walked out. He didn't come back that night. I was awakened in the early morning by a loud knock on the door. Bella was pounding on it, not slowing down. "Mummy wants to talk to you," she shouted through the door. I didn't answer. She's calling a family meeting." I grinned. Of course she is. I changed, pulled my hair up into a bun, and went into the living room. Deborah was sitting on the sofa, her back straight, a cup of tea in her hands, like a queen holding an audience. Orlando had his arms crossed, looking sullenly at the floor. Bella was curled up in a ball, scrolling through her phone. Alberto stood by the window, as if he wanted to escape. Deborah took a deep breath and forced a smile, the fakest I'd ever seen. "I think we started off on the wrong foot," she said sweetly. I sank into a chair, crossing my legs. "Should we remember how you trespassed, insulted my parenting, and refused to leave when I asked you to?" Her smile twitched. "We thought we were welcome. Did I invite you?" Silence. "Exactly," I said. "So what's the point of this meeting?" Deborah sighed dramatically, like an actress in the final act. "Alberto and I talked," she looked at him. "And we decided it would be best if we all worked together to find a solution." "A solution?" I asked, and my grin was not just ironic, but cold, calculated mockery, because I already understood that the game had begun, and I was now the one making the rules. "The solution was for you to leave." Deborah blinked, but not a muscle moved on her face. It remained haughty, frozen in an expression of offended dignity, like an actress who had been interrupted in her monologue. "That's not an option," she said. I raised my eyebrows. "Excuse me?" Orlando, who always kept a low profile, suddenly cleared his throat and delivered a speech that oozed sweaty awkwardness. "Legal, yes, you can kick us out," he admitted, as if he were forcing the words out of himself, like a stinging medicine, "but it will cause a lot of problems." I narrowed my eyes, as if examining a new, previously unknown kind of hypocrisy under a microscope. "What problems?" I asked, my voice cold, precise, and honed like a blade. Deborah set her cup down on the saucer with a sound like she was settling an argument. "Alberto will be in a very difficult situation," she said, and her voice was sweet, with a gentle threat veiled in concern. "Family is not something you can just throw away." And then it finally hit me. It wasn't about them wanting to stay. It was a threat. Direct, elegantly served, like a dish in a fine restaurant. Bella grinned, lazily, without looking up from the screen. Deborah leaned forward and spoke with that same face I had come to recognize, the face of someone confident in her own superiority. "We can do this easily, dear. We're staying. We're helping. You don't have to do it alone." And her gaze slid to Alberto, meaningfully, sharply, with pressure. "Alberto won't have to choose a side." Alberto shifted, as if the ground beneath his feet had become shaky. "Mama, that's not true," he murmured, but Deborah immediately, almost affectionately, covered him with the phrase, like a lid. "Of course it is. Marriage is a compromise, isn't it?" And then, at that very moment, I understood what her real game was. She hadn't just invaded my home, she was trying to tear it apart from the inside, manipulating my son against his wife, playing on his feelings, on his insecurities, on his guilt. But she had made a fatal mistake. She thought I was broken. That I was vulnerable. That after the sleepless nights, the pain, the worries, and the endless reproaches, I had no strength left to fight. I smiled, slowly, sharply, with the confidence that comes only to someone who has been through pain and chosen not to break. "Okay, Deborah," I said with predatory calm. "Want to play this game? Let's play." Deborah nodded, her smile like a mask, triumphant, disgustingly false. She thought I would make excuses. That I would give in. That I would cry quietly in the corner. It hadn't occurred to her that I would flip the board, I leaned forward, too, mimicking her pose. Okay, Deborah. Let's make this interesting. You want to help, right? Her eyes lit up with triumphant anticipation. Of course, dear. We want what's best for you and the baby. Perfect, I said, squaring my shoulders. Then let's test it. Let's see how useful you really are. She froze. What? What do you mean? I stretched, stood up, walked slowly to the counter by the kitchen, pulled out a notebook I'd written the night before between feedings, and threw it down on the coffee table with a snap. A list, I explained. A to-do list. Laundry, cleaning, grocery shopping, meal prep, night feedings, my postpartum care. There's a ton on there. If you're so eager to stay, you might as well take care of it. Deborah's face fell. Well, she began, but I cut her off. Oh, and don't forget, Bella's here too. She sleeps like a princess until noon, but she's got diaper changes and bottle cleaning to do if she wants to stay. Bella sat up abruptly. What the hell? She hissed. I turned to Orlando. What about you? Do you like to lie on my couch all day? Great. There's a lot to do around the house. The fence is falling apart. The garage is a mess. The gutters are clogged. Welcome to everyday life. Orlando swallowed. Deborah stared at me as if I'd suggested she join the war effort. Do you seriously think we should do housework? She sounded deeply offended. I cocked my head to the side. But you said you wanted to help, Deborah. What did you think that meant? Drinking tea, barking orders, and watching me fall over? Bella groaned, rolling her eyes. That's so unfair. Orlando muttered under his breath, where the hell is my belt? Deborah was seething. And Alberto, bless his heart, was barely suppressing a grin. I looked at them all and asked sweetly, well? Are you helping or are you leaving? Deborah's jaw clenched. She glanced at the pad as if it were spitting in her face, then stood up abruptly, snatched it up, and hissed, fine. If that's what it takes to prove we care, we'll do it. Bella stared at her as if her mother had lost her mind. Mom. She began, but Deborah had already turned around. Not now, she snapped. She thought I was bluffing. She had no idea I was being completely serious. And that was fine. Deborah began to fold the laundry aggressively, almost defiantly, methodically, and abruptly, throwing things around as if she were getting back at them. Bella tried to change one diaper and nearly threw up. Orlando went outside to mend the fence, smashed his finger with a hammer, and immediately announced he needed a 3-hour break. By lunchtime, Deborah was sweating profusely, her hair plastered to her temples, her voice tinged with irritation. Bella was glued to her phone, and Orlando had disappeared into thin air. And I leaned back in my chair, picked up a cup of tea, carefully brought it to my lips, and for the first time in days, allowed myself to truly enjoy the moment. On the second day, Deborah had had enough, evident in her hunched back, in the way she stood in the laundry room, her gaze fixed on the slowly rotating, almost hypnotically uniform circles of the washing machine drum, as if she were hoping to find some meaning in them, or perhaps salvation from the routine she had drowned herself in when she triumphantly crossed the threshold of my house. She didn't even notice my appearance, she just sighed without looking. I don't know how you do this every day. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. Because I have to, Deborah. That's the difference. You came here thinking you were in charge, thinking you could waltz by my rules, treat my house like a resort, and that I was this naive girl who needed you, but you're giving in already, and it's only been 2 days. She swallowed hard, with the kind of bitterness that doesn't hide behind a smile. I came closer. You don't help when you seize power and make people feel small. You help when you respect other people's space, their choices, their boundaries, something you've never done, Deborah. And for the first time since she'd arrived, I saw in her eyes not arrogance, not irritation, not mockery, but uncertainty, a slight, barely perceptible uncertainty, but real, and it was enough to feel that something, however tiny, had shifted. That night, when the house was quiet and I was rocking Noah in my arms, soothing him with gentle movements, breathing in his baby scent and listening to his fragile breathing, Alberto walked into the room, a strange, anxious tension in every movement. I looked up, wary. "I need to tell you something," he began, and his voice was strangely hoarse. I took a deep breath, knowing there was more to the phrase than just words. "If this is about your mother and her so-called good intentions again, save it." "It's not that," he said, and something in his tone froze me, like a cold hand on the back of my neck. "Deborah called her lawyer today." I was speechless. "What?" I breathed, my stomach tightening, as if all the air had been ripped from my lungs. He nodded, his eyes darting around, avoiding mine. She wants to know about grandparents' rights." My veins turned cold. This wasn't just a visit. This was an offensive. She wasn't just trying to stay, she was preparing to fight for my child. Alberto looked at me with the guilty expression of a dog caught in the act. "She says it's just a precaution," he muttered. I whirled around to face him. "A precaution? Because she's invaded my home and is destroying my life from the inside?" He winced. "I don't think she really wants custody. She just needs to feel in control." "I'm done," I said, standing up. "And you knew about it, didn't you?" His silence thundered louder than any answer. "How long have you known?" I asked calmly, too calmly, the way you say before a storm. He swallowed. "A few days. A few days." My husband knew his mother was consulting about possible legal action against me, and he said nothing. I felt sick. "You let me sit at the table with her, smiling, believing that I had the situation under control, while she was essentially plotting behind my back." He wiped his face with his hands, as if he wanted to erase the guilt. "She swore she wouldn't serve. She just wanted options." I laughed harshly, without a single note of humor. "You let her again." "As always." "I didn't think she would do it." "Of course you didn't think, Alberto. You don't think at all." "And I'll think about it." I went out into the kitchen. Deborah was sitting at the table, as if nothing had happened, sipping tea as if she had not only not threatened my motherhood, but had not even touched on any sensitive topics. Bella was typing something on her phone, and Orlando was pretending to be engrossed in the newspaper, although his hands were shaking. I stood in the middle of the kitchen. "So, Deborah," I said, my voice level and icy. "When were you going to tell me you hired a lawyer?" She blinked, feigning surprise. "Excuse me?" "Don't pretend. Alberto told me about your interest in grandparental rights." Deborah put down her cup and sighed, as if I were an inconvenience. "Now, honey, don't be dramatic. You're trying to take my child away from me." "That's an exaggeration. I would never take Noah away." "Then why do you need a lawyer?" She crossed her arms. "Because I was concerned. You were hostile, and I wanted to make sure I didn't lose my right to see my grandson." "Hostile?" I asked, feeling every cell in my body tighten. She nodded. "You've been pushing us away from the start. Because you invaded my home without an invitation. We're family." "That's what family does," she said, waving her hand as if I were a petulant girl. Bella snorted, and Orlando chuckled. I turned to Alberto. "Say something." He opened his mouth, then closed it. And that was it. I knew at that moment, my marriage was dead. Alberto would never choose me. I took a sharp breath, squared my shoulders, and smiled. "Okay," I said. "You want legal intervention? Then let's go all in." Deborah frowned. "What do you mean?" I pulled my phone out of my pocket. "I'm calling my lawyer." She tensed. "That's not necessary." "Oh, but it is. Because I'm filing for a restraining order." The color drained from her face. Bella gasped, and Orlando dropped his paper. "Don't be ridiculous," Deborah snapped, but her voice was already unsure. "I'm absolutely serious," I said slowly, clearly, almost solemnly, as if I were passing judgment. You've crossed the line for the last time, and there will be no more conversations, no more concessions, no more subtle hints that you can ignore. You pose a threat to me, to my child, and, last but not least, to Alberto, who is getting deeper and deeper into the web of your manipulations with each passing day, losing not only his own will, but also what remains of real, honest intimacy between us. I turned to him, seeing how he was frozen in that strange state between indecision and panic. You need to decide right now whose side you are on, I said, not raising my voice, but there was so much steel in every word that the room became quieter than ever. His mouth twitched as if he were trying to find an answer, but instead it came out as a silent sigh, and when he glanced at Deborah and then, briefly, almost fearfully, at me, I understood everything I needed to understand. I nodded slowly, as if saying goodbye to something dear but not mine, turned and went into the bedroom, where I wasted no time in packing. I packed diapers, bottles, several sets of baby clothes, a favorite blanket, changed into jeans and a hoodie myself, carefully placed Noah sleeping in the carrier, and, without turning around, dialed Nora's number, who, without asking questions, said that we could stay with her for as long as necessary. Alberto didn't stop me, not a word, not a gesture, not even a last glance. Deborah, loud and pathetic as always, accused me of breaking up the family, screaming about ingratitude, betrayal, taking away my grandson. Bella just rolled her eyes in dramatic irritation, and Orlando remained silent, as if neither what was happening nor the people involved in this drama concerned him. I buckled Noah into his car seat, got behind the wheel, and without allowing myself to look back, drove away, into the night, into the unknown, but with a sense of freedom that almost burned in my chest. A week later, I filed for divorce. I was awarded sole custody. The judge looked at everything and saw what I had known all along. Deborah was not a worried grandmother. She was a woman obsessed with control, unable to back down, unable to accept someone else's boundaries, unable to stop. Alberto wrote to me a few months later, full of regret and remorse, but I didn't answer, because there are betrayals from which you can't just go back, and there are people who are not entitled to a second chance. Write a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and put a like. See you soon.